Please be seated. Well, welcome everybody. I know it gets very hot under the lights, so we've got windows open, especially doors open. But we need to be aware of that, and particularly as we've got quite a few councillors who can't make it this evening because of the dreaded COVID. Let's keep business moving so we don't have to stay all night in this chamber. Fine chamber as it is. So a couple of practical issues to highlight. First of all, no fire drill. So if you hear the fire alarm, it's actually a fire alarm. Please make your way out of the building in a calm and orderly fashion, and you will be ably guided by the staff. Anybody with mobility issues should gather in the foyer on the left-hand side of the chamber as you leave, near to the balustrade, and assistance will be provided. Toilets are at the far end of the corridors, either side of the chamber, ladies to the left and gents to the right. So far, I've received apologies from Councillors Button, Catt, Davis, Everett, Galvin, Hampton, Padder, Vaughan Thomas, Viv Thomas, Price, Stootley, Wright and Young. So I wish them all speedy recoveries. So let's hope it. Have you got any more apologies coming this way? Any more apologies people are aware of? No? Okay. Lord Mayor's announcements. I'll just two briefly. Both actually civic services. For those who came to the city service, started here in the City Hall and then we processed wonderfully down to the cathedral, showing Norwich at its best and showing both the dignity and authority of the city, its history, and the fact that Norwich is special. So thank you for all who took part in it. It was a great celebration of the city. But we also had another civic service, the Sheriff and I on just the other day on Saturday, where we went to a civic service at the Hebrew Synagogue on Earlham Road, where again we had a wonderful time and were treated very hospitably. And I'm just so pleased that they are a part of the Norwich community and they recognise that, and they do have more plans to include and be more inclusive and a part of the city. So two very nice engagements. Declarations of interest. Do any members have any declarations of interest to make on any items of the agenda? That's a standard one, isn't it? Would you like to say briefly?
7A, please, if you do know interest.
Thank you. And it's a non few. You're going to leave the room. Oh, wow. Okay. So now we've got questions of the public. 3 questions of the public. I'm welcome to all of you. It's an important part of the democratic process that members of the public have access to their elected members. Just for those who are new to this game, you have 3 minutes in which to give the question. You will then receive an answer. If you wish to give one supplementary question, then you've got another minute in which to give that question. So first of all, we have Ms. Laura Landemore. Ms. Landemore, would you please ask your question?
Hello everyone. Here's my question. Residents have been told by the City Council to remove chairs, plants or other items from the balcony outside their front door. Now, I've spoken to postal workers, a fire and safety officer and a police officer, and no one saw what was on the balconies as a health and safety or access issue. Those that own their property, like me, understand that the ownership does stop at the front door, but we believe it is fair, reasonable and justified for the well-being of citizens to have certain items important to us and important to our well-being on the balconies. People with mental health and anxiety find items on the balcony a comfort and joy to them when they sit outside. Seeing as other authorities see no health and safety or access issues, don't you think it's fair, reasonable and justified of you as a city council to allow us certain items for our own well-being on the balconies?
Thank you for that question. Councillor Harris, would you please give your reply?
Thank you for your question. The safe management of communal areas falls under the Regulatory Reform Fire Safety Order of 2005. The order has been designed to keep residents in buildings of multiple occupancy safe. Under the order, local authorities have a duty to keep communal areas free of hazard or hindrance. A safe limit by what can go in communal areas was agreed with the Norwich Fire Service and Rescue. This is 1 plant, 1 doormat and 1 small ornament in low-rise communal areas. The presence of additional items in the communal area can present a hazard, especially in the event of an emergency and when access is required by the emergency services. It is also essential that we keep communal areas free of hazard to residents and visitors who may be visually impaired or those that use a wheelchair or walking aid. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms Landamore, you're allowed one supplementary question. Do you have a supplementary question?
I do, yes.
Go ahead, please.
So, once you remove what little joy we do have left in life from our balconies, what do you plan on doing next in the community? Because we're certainly going to need somewhere well kept and tidy, private and safe for us and our dogs to be. At the moment, that's our balconies. And if you take that from us, I expect you would have plans for other areas for us to sit and cultivate more than just 1 plant, to have more than just 1 ornament, and to help us maintain a good mental health and well-being, and to let our dogs out safely.
Thank you very much. Ms Landamore. Councillor Harris, would you please give your reply?
Yes, thank you for the supplementary question. I think it's I understand what you're saying about your own private space, but when you own a flat or when you're a tenant in a flat, the balcony outside is not your own private space. And we took a long time to get to a place where we felt that residents could make something of their own with the 1 plant and the doormat and the small ornament, but we can't have hazards for which cause such an issue. I know officers would like 0 tolerance, and contrary to what you're saying, this is imposed by many other local authorities. The number of items you're allowed was agreed some years ago, and it's just, sometimes it's unfortunate when residents perhaps get a little bit, so we say, over-enthusiastic with their own space, with their space outside their door, and then that can spoil it for other people. So, although you won't like my answer, I do fully back the officers in this case, and I would encourage you to use any local outdoor space which you probably have got very close to your flat.
Thank you very much, Councillor Harris. So we have a second question here from Mr. Liam Calvert. Nice to see you. Would you please answer your question?
When I venture outside of Norwich to places like Old Campton, Royston, Cossey, Thorpe St Andrew, I'm always amazed by the sense of community and the quality of local facilities, such as recreation grounds and halls, that are available to all. When I ask local people to tell me to tell you how this has come about. It's because they have a parish council that allows them to respond to local needs and take decisions at a local level. The vast majority of people in Norfolk are represented and well served by parish councils. Will this council commit to supporting Norwich residents in areas where there is a desire for the creation of parish councils by using the powers granted by the local government and health improvement, by the Local Government and Public Involvement in Health Act 2007?
Thank you very much. Councillor Kendrick, would you please speak?
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Callan. May I first of all commiserate of you on not getting elected in recent elections. I would point out that many of the local parks and services provided in Norwich are as good, if not better, than those in the suburbs of our city. Furthermore, many parks being awarded prestigious green flags for being excellent parks. As a Mulsol Heath conservator, I can state that the City Council provides support a parish council could not match. The council works in close cooperation with local people to manage the community centres in many neighbourhoods. Any proposals for a parish council must be bottom up rather than top down. 23 years ago, the council formed elected neighbourhood forums, and the scheme eventually failed. So we should learn from the lessons of the past. Developing another tier of local government at a time when this council has been cut by over 40% since 2010, simply detract from the overwhelming practical priority of developing and extending social, environmental and economic justice.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kendrick. Mr. Calvert, do you have a supplementary question?
I do.
Please go ahead. You've got 1 minute.
I'm slightly surprised by your answer. I should provide a point of correction. Of course, the costs of parish council aren't borne by the local authority. They are precepted. Secondly, I just want to say, what is it about the rest of Norfolk that is in some way deserving of direct local democracy that people of Norwich are undeserving of?
Thank you very much. Councillor Kendrick.
Thank you very much. I don't think the principle opposed to parish councils, the demand comes from the bottom up. We tried 23 years ago, different authorities to have elected neighbourhood forums, and it failed. Parish councils do some excellent work, but I must point out the tremendous differences in social demography from places like Hells and Old Cat and Sprouse and Dalton and Andrews compared to the city of Norwich, where, of course, in those out-suburban towns, there are obviously better populations in terms of economic benefits, but also a rather large number of older people who are not, shall we say, much more free from the common constraints of people in Norwich who actually struggle with their week-to-week needs to meet the family's needs and obviously the financial difficulties that we all face. So yes, I'm all in favour of parish councils if the demand comes from the people themselves.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kendrick. The third question is from Sir Joshua Worley. Welcome. And this is on behalf of the Norwich Market Traders Association. Mr. Worley, would you please ask your question?
Yes, thank you, Lord Mayor. The cost of living crisis has led people across the country to tighten their belts and think more carefully about their spending. Coupled with the recovery from COVID and unprecedented threats from rival markets in the city centre, now is a very difficult time to be a small business on Norwich's historic provisions market. Traders need more support than ever, yet this council has chosen to increase our rents by 8.3%, costing some businesses on the market hundreds more pounds per month. Additionally, traders were given little to no warning about this rent increase, meaning businesses which might struggle to keep up with the increase had no time to consider their next steps. This has been a devastating blow to traders who keep alive our historic market integral to the fabric of our fine city. So would this council consider reversing the decision to increase rent on the market by 8.3%?
Thank you very much for your question. Councillor Chalmers, would you please give your reply?
Thank you for coming tonight, Josh. It's good to put a face to the name, and I will come along to your Traders Association meetings. I'll read out the answer that I've written, which is the Council appreciates the financial challenges faced by traders on the market. We have supported market traders during COVID with rent discounts. There was no RPI increase in rents from 2016 to 2021. Footfall does remain strong, and there is strong demand from traders at this present time to take on the units. Traders, I understand, were notified in March of this year that the rents were being reviewed in line with RPI. This year's increase is being applied to 11 months from May this year to March next year, and service charges are being held at the current level. We will continue to work with traders in the future to make the market as attractive as possible for businesses and visitors. The Council is, I'm afraid, under significant financial pressure and needs to maintain and improve the services it provides to the most vulnerable in our community. I'm afraid these pressures simply do not allow us to reverse the rent increase at this time.
Thank you very much, Councillor Giles. Mr. Worley, you're allowed one supplementary question. Do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, I do. Thank
Please
you.
go ahead.
I'm aware that this council also owns a vast portfolio of other commercial properties here in Norwich and further afield, for example in Kent, Essex and Northamptonshire. It would be interesting to know on behalf of all traders how much this council is planning on increasing the rents for these properties compared to the 8.3% increase to small, independent, local Norwich market rates.
Thank you very much. Councillor Giles, please reply.
I don't know the answer to that question. Unfortunately, it doesn't fall within my portfolio, but I will speak to colleagues. The RPI rent increase in accordance with the most recent RPI figure prior to the budget is set out in the lease with market traders. We haven't applied that in the last 5 years. We have given rent discounts over COVID. We have been allowed arrears to develop for certain traders and put in place sustainable plans for them to pay back over quite lengthy periods. So I don't have the answer to the question you just asked. I will speak to colleagues.
Thank you very much, Councillor Giles. All the questioners are welcome to stay at this meeting as members of the group as long as they like, but it's not compulsory.
Lord Mayor, can I just say, it's sometimes quite hard to hear people. I couldn't really hear what Councillor Giles was saying, so I'm just asking if people... I don't know if it's the fans or if it's the microphones, positioning of the microphones. Councillor Harris, I can hear you.
But they will be published, those answers.
Yeah,
So, okay. Technical advice here. If you speak more closely to the microphone. There will be no petitions, so we go on to the minutes of the last meeting. I call upon Councillor Waters to move the minutes of the meeting held on the 15th of March 2022 and the 24th of May 2022.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. Formally moved.
Councillor Bogline, I'm calling on you to second the minutes.
Wrongly seconded.
Thank you very much. We'll now move to the vote. All those for? Or any abstentions? Any against? So that's unanimous. Unanimous, I've said it again, unanimous. Right, questions cabinet members abound. It might say in your paperwork that there are 24 questions, because that was the case, but these are reduced to 21 questions from members of the council to cabinet members. So for various reasons, some of the questions were not put. So 21 questions, starting with question 1. Councillor Lovey, the question has been published, the answer has been given. So do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, I have a supplementary question for Councillor Hampton, and I expect that it will get to her in some.
So you'll forward the mic to her.
Sorry? I do have a supplementary for Councillor Hampton, who's not here,
yes,
and it will get to her at some point. It is disappointing that we don't have figures for how many hours the phones were on this call back later message. It resulted in elderly people becoming very, very frustrated not being able to get through to the council.
The council's stated goal is to increase the numbers using online services and therefore reduce the number of people using the phone line. But have we done any research to find out how many tenants and customers do not have access to online? My concern is that we are leaving the elderly and the vulnerable without adequate contact with the council. In fact, we're leaving them behind.
Thank you very much. A very clear question in there, so we'll get back to the answer to that to you as soon as we can. Oh, you're going to answer? Go ahead.
Just for a point of clarification, I think it's normal practice that if a questioner is absent or the recipient of that question is absent, then the supplementary is not read out because there is no opportunity for that councillor to have a response. And so I think that needs to be a written reply or a written supplementary. In this case, Councillor Hampton will respond to that information, and that will then appear in the minutes of the next council meeting.
Thank you very much for that piece of advice. Question 2 is from Councillor Ackery. Councillor Ackery, do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, thank you, Lord Mayor. I do. Thank you very much, Councillor Stoddard, for your answer. I am aware that changes were made to the original plans for succeeding. But my supplementary is, are you confident that with buses reversing out of the sawtooth phase, it will be a safe environment for cyclists and pedestrians? Because I know that along the way there have been concerns. Thank you.
Yes, and the first thing is just to reinforce that the city centre doesn't have a space large enough to accommodate the size of bus station which a city of this size needs. And that's why we have to use Stevens and we have to use Castle Meadow in addition to the bus station. And that's regrettable, but it's where we are. It's a fact of life in Norwich. And the sawtooth bays, which have been used in other cities and other places, so we're aware of how they operate, they will ensure that there will no longer be queuing buses congesting St Stephen's, and that's going to improve air quality in particular, but also it will mean it creates a much more pleasant environment in which to shop and linger. And we know from experience elsewhere, yes, people have expressed concerns about safety, but the evidence is, and there's the evidence of other places where there are sort of bus bays, is that it's not health and safety is not an issue of increased risk to cyclists. And we can only go on the evidence. And clearly, we looked at that very carefully when the proposals came to Transport and Norwich Committee, and those issues were raised there and then responded to and we were satisfied that there was no additional risk.
Thank you very much, Councillor Stoddard. Next question is from Councillor Matt Sands. Councillor Matt Sands, do you have a supplementary question?
I do, Lord Mayor.
Please go ahead.
Sorry. Sorry, Lord Mayor.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. I am impressed with the practical assistance this council has given, and it's crucial that refugees who do come to live in the city are hosted by people with suitable property, but are also, most importantly, safe to do this. Would you agree that it is shameful so few refugees from Ukraine have been allowed access, and you will keep making the strongest case to the government for obstacles to be removed and proper support provided to both those who provide assistance and local government who is leading on this vital work? Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Sands. Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Councillor Sands, for the supplementary. Yes, we do have a proud history in this city of welcoming refugees many hundreds of years, and I'm so pleased it's continuing. And so pleased so many of our residents have come forward to offer assistance, not just to accommodate accommodation with the same other offers of support that I've seen across social media. But sadly, I must agree with you about the government's handling. It's been shameful. The system's been chaotic, to say the least, and quite frankly. I would expect better when people are fleeing war. But if we look at the government's track record on refugees, I sadly am not surprised. But of course, I will continue to advocate as you ask and ensure that those here are supported as much as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. The next question is from Councillor Quigley. Councillor Quigley, do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Lord Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Kendrick, for your response. Despite the impending reality of voter ID soon coming into action, government is yet to firmly decide on the type of ID that will be necessary or how local government will administer this costly and unnecessary burden. Given that the Norwich North MP, Chloe Smith, was instrumental while at the Cabinet Office for pursuing this immoral venture, can you confirm that you will make the strongest case to both her and government as to why this is dangerous, and that this council will do all it can practically to ensure its citizens are not denied their legal right to vote?
Thank you for your supplementary question. Councillor Kendrick.
Thank you very much, Councillor Higgins, for asking that supplementary question. It gives me the opportunity to state very firmly that this council, as in the past, and will continue to firmly oppose voter identification. We have written to the government to oppose this in the past, both to the Go and to Ms. Smith as well. This does indeed represent, as you say, a dangerous attack on the individual right to vote. I can also state, and this will obviously come up later in the motion 17, that this council is already working very strongly with the Electoral Registration Office, partners, and also with the public. Obviously, this continues to be an ongoing matter. We will find out more about the final Tory proposals in the weeks to come, but I can assure you that we have and we will continue to fight as well as much as we can, try and implement measures that will at least mitigate the results of this appalling Tory legislation.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kendrick. Councillor Erin Fulton-McAllister with the next question. Do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, please, Lord Mayor.
Please go ahead.
Thank you. And thank you, Councillor Jones, for your reply. I'm pleased that our council staff were able to provide such emergency assistance. Given your experiences with the impact of poorly converted former office accommodation being run by an unfit landlord who was subsequently banned for what occurred in nearby St Faith's Lane, can you explain any similarities between the two cases and what makes them so dangerous?
Please go ahead, Councillor Jones.
Given that work is still ongoing by officers around investigations, I won't go into too much detail around Peter's case, but yes, there are very significant similarities that are really worrying trend when we're talking about things like fire protection and alarm systems. With 5 years on, we're sent from Grenville, and we shouldn't still be talking about this. I think one of the biggest concerns is the seeming, from my perspective, lack of interest in the well-being of residents from landlords like these, and a lack of concern for them. And the length of time that's been taken to address defects, we saw this in these cases of faith, with repeated orders being made to make improvements, and those being ignored. And we're months on, and we're in a similar situation. These are unnecessary delays. People are paying rent for accommodation, or they are leaseholders in properties, and they should be able to return to their home, but these need to be safe homes. We also raised a larger question around office conversions to accommodation, and I would say I remain quite sceptical around those. The government has removed far too many safeguards. Some might see those as red tape, but I certainly don't. These are vital checks that ensure housing is simply fit for human habitation in the course of development. There are very strong similarities, in my opinion, and we will continue to take robust action in the city against any landlord that puts our residents at risk.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. The next question is from Councillor Burchett-Coulton. Councillor Burchett-Coulton, do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, please, Lord Mayor.
Please go ahead.
Thank you, Councillor Starr, for your reply. I'm interested in the extra money this change of services bringing to the council. Has there been any noticeable uptake in the amount of income the council is now collecting? And how will it be spent between vital services?
Well, thank you for your question, Councillor. And one would expect an increase in income as a consequence of this, but also need to remember that we historically had contracts of £600,000 for the collection of cash, and of course the need for those contracts is going to be reduced. So that's also going to help the council financially. The income will continue to be spent on council services, and that's very important. As you know, since 2010, over the last 12 years, we've lost 40% of our funding, thanks to Tory austerity. So the income will enable us to continue vital services. And I think one example I would give in the midst of the cost of living crisis is our 100% council tax reduction scheme. As you know, the council tax benefit was abolished by the Tories about 10 years ago. We were one of very few councils that implemented a 100% council tax reduction scheme to compensate those who have been eligible at a full amount. And we continue to do that. We are maybe the last, or one of the last 2 or 3 councils to be doing that. And that's something that I think we can all be very proud of. But let's not forget the importance of the additional income that we generate, not just least in this way, but in other ways, through our investment portfolio and so forth, which enable us to be able to continue to do that.
Thank you very much, Councillor Stannard. Next question is from Councillor Driver to Councillor Giles. Councillor Driver, do you have a supplementary question?
No, Lord Mayor, I just thank Councillor Giles for his reply. Thank you.
Okay. Question 8 from Councillor Peake to Councillor Oliver. Do you have a supplementary question, Councillor Peake?
Yes, I do. Thank you.
Please go ahead.
Thank you, Councillor Oliver, for your reply. Building good quality, safe and secure accommodation which helps people who are experiencing homelessness and thus sleeping remains vital. I was pleased to vote this in planning application when it comes to committee, but aware of the local campaign run to try and stop it, can the Cabinet member confirm that this council will continue to support partners like St Martin's Housing Trust to ensure more accommodation is built?
Thank you very much, Councillor Peake. Councillor Oliver?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Peake. I was fortunate enough to hear Dr. Jan Shelton speak recently, and she told us that it's the 50-year anniversary of St Martin's. She said it's nothing to celebrate, we'd all rather see no more homelessness. However, we need to see things in a strategic way. And on one hand, you see people living on the streets, but then on the other hand, they need somewhere to live and somewhere supported. I understand there are extensions on the planning committee. Councillor Harris and I visited the development recently on Kent's Hill, and I can confirm that as well as being near lovely Mousehole Heath and Kent's Heights, there's a small communal garden plan so people can socialise together, and people have their own outdoor space too. I think those people deserve all our care and support, and I really look forward to seeing the development once it's finished, and also hopefully going to welcome the new tenants. And I hope the ward councillors will join me in extending the new residents a very warm welcome when they do arrive.
Thank you very much, Councillor Oliver. Next question is from Councillor Huntley. Councillor Huntley, do you have a supplementary for Councillor Waters?
Yes, Lord Mayor, I do. Could Councillor Waters offer an explanation as to why an increasing number of city residents have fallen into poverty over the last decade?
Councillor Waters.
Thank you very much, Councillor Huntley, for a very pertinent question, because if Boris Johnson was to be in the lead, the cost of living crisis that we are currently facing is a product of COVID and the war in Ukraine. Now, these may be factors, but I think what both those events have highlighted is the threadbare system of social security that we have, and that is the product of at least 10 years. That is the product of £37 billion worth of cuts in benefits, many of those to people at work. And it presages, I think, the points that we will be making, that Councillor Huntley will be leading on the motion about the cost of living crisis and poverty, and I've got more to say at that point.
Thank you very much, Councillor Waters. Next question is Councillor Sue Sands to Councillor House. Councillor Sue Sands, do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, I do, Lord Mayor, thank you. Thank you for the answer, Councillor Harris, very complete. Could I please ask, or please say, I'm really pleased that this phase of development is underway, but can you tell me the steps that RG Carter Limited is taking to be a considerate contractor as the build progresses? Thank you.
Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Councillor Sands. The Norwich City Council delivery team are very keen to ensure that we promote construction excellence, and this is done in many ways. Firstly, the delivery team aims this year to strategically move towards being recognised as an intelligent, responsible and sustainable developer. This involves ensuring our team embraces what is best in class. Therefore, the NCC delivery team has been working very closely with RG Carter to register for considerate contractors scheme. The scheme is designed to raise standards in the construction industry. Construction sites, companies and suppliers voluntarily register with the scheme and agree to abide by the Code of Considerate Practice designed to encourage best practice beyond statutory requirements. The scheme's Code of Considerate Practice has three primary areas: respect the community, care for the environment and value their workforce. The NCC delivery team are collaboratively working alongside RG Carter to aim high on the registration of 3-score Phase 3 and aim for platinum status, which is the highest level to be recognised under this scheme. When considering respecting the community, our delivery team and contractor have already done several things. They've been responsive to ward councillors' inquiries to improve the signage around the construction site, and informing the local community proactively of construction activity in the area. And I was pleased to see how tidy the site was when I was out there the other week. They also engaged with local schools and taken materials, PPE and materials to those schools and built play equipment engaging the school children. This was to demonstrate the importance of recycling waste materials and show the pupils the basics to building a home. This is part of a wider initiative where our delivery team will also be promoting the importance of sustainability and indeed the importance of education to 7 to 11-year-olds on this subject. Also, which I was really pleased to find out about, they're working in the community by recognising mental health and spending a number of hours per month by engaging with the elderly residents in the local care village. So sitting, talking to them and listening to them. So that some of the residents, as we know, don't receive many visitors at all. So I'm really pleased with how things are moving along. I shall be out there to visit again very shortly, I expect, and also to see a new puppy, I hope. Yes,
Thank you very much, Councillor Harris. Councillor Matthew Fulton McAllister, you have the next question to Councillor Harris again. Do you have a supplementary for her?
I do. So all of us in this chamber are aware of what a let NCC is. However, for those who are viewing this at home, potentially for the benefit of the press who hopefully might report on this, would it be possible for you to say a bit more about the scheme and how we can track some more landlords into that scheme, please?
Thank you, Councillor Matthew Fulton McAllister. Councillor Harris.
Thank you for the supplementary. As a matter of interest, I went onto our website, and I would encourage anybody to do that and look up Let NCC, the private sector leasing scheme. And it quite simply says, what's in it for you? So a guaranteed rent, whether or not your property is occupied, option repairs and maintenance service, low management fee, expert advice and information, and very importantly, it will help break the cycle of homelessness. So that we need all sorts of properties. So I would encourage anyone to have a look at the website and contact the contact details for landlords there. And what was also quite interesting, there was a case study from somebody who uses the scheme, who used to manage his own properties, but didn't feel and didn't feel like passing them on to another agent to manage, so he decided to try NCC. And he feels very comfortable with the arrangement. He's pleased with his guaranteed income, and he liked having the option to carry out any repairs and maintenance himself, or asking us to do them for him, at a cost, of course. And he says that some of the tenants have been absolutely exceptional and made improvements to his property, so he's really happy. So he would thoroughly recommend the scheme. So I'd encourage anyone who's got a property that they perhaps have got empty at the moment to have a look at this scheme on the web and contact us. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. The next question is from Councillor Galvin, sent her apologies, so there will be no supplementary question. Question 13 from Councillor Green. So, do you have a supplementary question?
I do, Lord Mayor.
Please go ahead.
Thank you for your answer. Council clearly sees the urgent reasons for removing sharks from some properties, and they're very, very good at it in some places. But if those needles are thrown from the pavement over the wall into somebody's private garden or garden, it seems that that need isn't recognised, and if you can't either remove the needles yourself or afford to pay someone else to do it, then it can build up so that your space can look like the scene from train spotting. So my question is, I'd like to ask how the health and safety needs of such a person is risk assessed in preparing the answer, but also in turning down requests for help from residents who have a very nasty problem that's not of their own making and puts them at risk.
Thank you very much, Councillor Green. Councillor Oliver, would you please reply?
Thank you, Councillor Grove. It sounds like quite a specific situation, so I'd like to know if I can help more, maybe think outside the box, but I'd say it's also a matter of, I don't know if it would come under criminal damage. I was seeing that people were going onto private property to substance misuse, and I was going to suggest that it should be reported to Norfolk Police, because that's a matter of trespass. So I have sympathy with anyone struggling with addiction, but clearly people need to be kept safe. Context of sharks being thrown over the wall is maybe not on, but quite unusually specific. It's the first time I've heard that, and I would like to follow up about the situation.
Thank you very much, Councillor Oliver. The next question is from Councillor Champion to Councillor Solar. Do you have a supplementary question, Councillor Champion? Yes.
Go ahead. Thank you. Given the long history of delays in enforcement, will the planning member commit on the increase of operational capacity to deal with the backlog with the enforcement action within planning?
Thank you very much, Councillor Solar. Would you like to reply?
I mean, if any conditions of planning consent are not implemented, then we do follow it up and we do chase it up. And I'm aware of many occasions where we've done that. I don't believe there is a need to increase capacity. Indeed, I don't believe we have the resources to do that in any case. But clearly, we work as hard as we possibly can to make sure that we follow up every breach when it occurs in a timely manner.
Thank you very much, Councillor Solar. Councillor Haynes, you have a question. Have you got a supplementary, Councillor Giles?
I have, thank you, Lord Mayor. I'm aware that some residents have been in contact with the council to ask for fruit trees to go to be grown on public land. Could you let me know what the response given was, please?
Thank you very much. Councillor Giles?
I'm not sure if you asked them whether the council could do it or whether they could do it themselves. If you forward the emails on to me, I'm happy to take it up.
Thank you very much. Councillor Price has sent his apologies, so there will be no supplementary from Councillor Price. Councillor Osborne, you had a question for Councillor Stannard. Do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, please, go ahead. Thank you very much, Councillor Stannard, for your response. It's actually a really good response, so thank you. Looking forward to seeing that. I do have a related question, which is about the council's commitment to reduce car parking space in the city. Recently, I was at Farmhouse Yard, which is where I know that the council wanted to cut down 2 trees to increase car parking capacity in the estate. So I just want to ask, how is the council's commitment to reducing car parking spaces in the city being implemented across all service areas?
Thank you very much. Mr. Stummer?
I can't comment on Barnard's. I'm not aware of the development that you're in the proposal there that you're talking about. And what we're doing is looking to identify surface car parks which are effectively redundant, which can be used better for housing in particular, because that's what the need is. At the same time as trying to encourage more people to use park and ride. And that will include, as time goes forward, car park pricing policies in support of that. So the starting point, as I said in my original answer, is that we're identifying a range of supply of sites, brownfield sites in the city, on which NRL can build, our own building company can build. That work hasn't been as rapid as I might have liked it to have been, as former chairman of the company until 2 weeks ago, but still a director, and clearly we've been pushing to have that work done in a timely way. It is progressive, but say not as fast as I might have liked.
Thank you very much. Councillor Stunnar. Councillor Katz sent an apology, so there will be no supplementary question. Councillor Bowline, you have a question to Councillor Kendrick. Would you like to ask a supplementary?
Yes, please. I think, we will, Councillor Kendrick, we will just disagree about the concrete approach to social value and procurement. However, we do agree that it's really important in procurement exercises. And given that there is a procurement social value guidance review, will you commit to integrating PPN 0620 and PPN 0621, which requires contractors to have a net zero commitment into this review?
Councillor Kendrick.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. We have only just recently discussed through the Council and Cabinet the question about procurement strategy. Now you've asked some very technical questions, and frankly I'm not able at this moment to actually answer them. I will look at the issues involved.
Thank you very much. Councillor Schmeary, you have a question for Councillor Waters. Do you have a supplementary to that question?
Yes, I do. Thank you very much, Lord Mayor, and thank you very much to Councillor Waters for his response. And I do accept that Norwich may well be doing better than comparable cities in terms of retail vacancy rates, but anyone who walks down St Stephen's or indeed around the city centre of Norwich cannot help but notice that there is a plethora of vacant retail space. And it is important that Norwich doesn't rest on its laurels and take proactive and often innovative action to promote small businesses, artists, charities, etc. that I mentioned in my question. So my supplementary question is, will the leader of the council commit to ensure that our retail offer is as dynamic as possible and offer vacant council-owned retail office or retail or office units in the city centre to those sort of less established businesses, perhaps through the meanwhile spaces scheme?
Thank you very much, Councillor Schmeary. Councillor Waters.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor, and thank you for your supplementary. I don't entirely accept the description that you have given of a passive city council not addressing these issues. And I think familiarity with the £25 million of the Times deal, which is looking to remodel the city centre, the award-winning business improvement district on which I sit with the chief executive, and the energy that they're putting into making Norwich a strong economy, drawing people back into the city. The 2014 Norwich Partnership, which is looking at ways of getting investment into Norwich. And I would say that some of the large multiples, like Debenhams is a classic example, which have now closed and will need to be reconfigured and repurposed, has in some ways had a potentially beneficial effect because we have a very strong small business, thriving independent sector, which has which has grown strongly. And I have to say, we wouldn't have had Aviva coming back into the city centre and moving out of the Broadway Business Park if they didn't think that the city centre was a dead space. And you think of all the student accommodation that's been built in strategic parts of the city centre, which increases demand and spend. So, as you know, there is a massive change underway in the retail sector. We need to understand what those changes are, and we do, because we work with our partners to understand how we can respond in a positive way to those things. So don't be pessimistic. There are many optimistic developments happening, and I'll be happy to drop you an email as we have one success after another.
Councillor Carlo, you have a question for Councillor Giles, and you have a supplementary chance.
Yes, thank you, Lord Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Giles. It is the case that designated green space, such as school playing fields and also informal green space, is being lost to development and not replaced, and it is important to calculate the losses. Oxford City Council, in its biodiversity strategy, has produced a useful bar chart for each ward in the city, showing the different land uses in the ward, including green space, and the percentage of land that makes up each type. Will the City Council produce a similar chart for each ward in Norwich, and the changes over the last 20 years, as part of the baseline study for the biodiversity strategy, please?
Thank you very much. Councillor Giles.
So alongside the biodiversity strategy, which is emerging as the Greater Norwich Green Infrastructure Strategy, and that is doing work in outline, and that will feed into the biodiversity action plan, which sits under the strategy.
Thank you very much, Councillor Giles. For more than 30 minutes have elapsed for the question time, and so there will be no second bite to the cherry for those who so wish. We'll now move to item 6 on the agenda, which is appointment to outside bodies. And it's important to note that there is an updated appendix A to this report. It's been circulated and it is available as a printed copy at the back of the room. So I hope you've all had a chance to see it. I'm calling on Councillor Kendrick to move item 6.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. This is my opportunity, and it's one that I very much welcome. Firstly, to thank all those members and the other representatives who have served as representatives of Norwich City Council and outside bodies. I think it's important to realise how important it is, because we as a local authority have a role to play within the wider community. And I know how much many of these groups very much welcome the role played by Norwich City Councillors and our other representatives. But first of all, may I thank those who have served for the last year. May I also thank those who have served this year, which is, as kindly said, Lord Mayor, you can find the names listed in Annex A. I hope that the members here will warmly and agree to these recommendations and share with me our thanks to the people involved.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kendrick. Councillor Driver, you're going to second the item.
Yes, thank you, Lord Mayor. Can I formally second the item and reserve the right to speak?
Of course you can. Group spokespersons. Councillor Schmierer, would you like to speak on behalf of the Greens?
Yes, thank you very much, Lord Mayor. And we in the Green Group are very happy to support this item, and indeed wish all the members, all these outside bodies, all the best in representing the views and the needs of the people of Norwich over the coming year. And it was quite interesting to see some of the names of former councillors, which demonstrates their ongoing commitment to the city, even without the title of councillor before their name. And as I said, we will be supporting this item, but there are a couple of caveats which I would just like to add, if I may, Lord Mayor. A lot of these outside bodies do go beyond party politics, and I would like to think that maybe in future years the appointments to these bodies might reflect the whole council rather than just the cabinet or the administration. Examples of these kind of organisations would include the Consolidated Charities, the Access Group, the Royal Authority, and several others. And I think it might also be a lovely opportunity to do something quite innovative, like allowing job shares, for example, to take the burden off just one councillor or one or two councillors in these, on these bodies. The other caveat that I'd like to make, if I may, on that, is that while several of the other of these outside bodies are undoubtedly, or well, have undoubtedly more of a sort of party political purview, and so it is only right, of course, that these should be appointments made by the Cabinet or the whole Cabinet members. I think members in the opposition parties would certainly appreciate an update of what happens in these outside bodies and the benefits that these have for the people of Norwich. So if I could maybe request, sort of maybe next year, as part of this report, a full update about some of those bodies and what the members have been doing on there, I think we'd very much appreciate it. But as I said, we will be supporting this item, and I wish everyone on those outside bodies every success over the coming year. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Smear. Councillor Lovell, would you like to speak on behalf of the Cabinet?
Yes, thank you, Lord Mayor. Usually this report of appointments to outside bodies goes through without much discussion. However, appearing on the same agenda as a motion for fair representation, I cannot allow that to happen this evening. And to some extent, Councillor Schmierer has said some of the things that I'm going to say, but he's put them far more gently. Because of the unfair first-past-the-post voting system, we see before us a long list of appointments to outside bodies, which is almost entirely composed of councillors belonging to the ruling party. Not councillors selected for their experience or their knowledge in a particular area. How does this benefit the people of Norwich? How can opposition councillors feel involved and contribute? How can Labour councillors fit all these outside appointments in? And most importantly, do they ever report back on what decisions are taken and their role in those decisions? Not to my knowledge. So why should I endorse this list? It should be exposed for the power-grabbing sham that it is. What are you afraid of? Why can't you share some of these roles with opposition councillors? Yes, as simple as that. We're opposition. The same applies to chairs and vice chairs of the few remaining committees that we have, all selected, apart from scrutiny, from Labour because they are not prepared to share with fellow councillors from different political persuasions. Not even the vice chair of Mousehold Heath Conservatives was allowed to be a Green councillor. He lives near the Mousehold Heath and has great interest in it and a love of the Heath, but no, he couldn't be. He could not possibly be voted in as vice chair, could he? I rest my case, and I will not be endorsing this report.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lovell. Any other councillors who wish to speak on this item? Councillor Waters.
Judith, you're fired up tonight. I mean, the fundamental difference is that we form the administration, and the policies that we pursue through the outside bodies that we are part of are a reflection of the debate that we've all had, most recently, I think, when we voted on the corporate plan in February. Now, I know, a number of council colleagues either abstained or voted against the corporate plan. Frankly, we have to be sure ourselves that the policies that we have been elected on, as recently as May, are the things that we can follow through consistently in the very broad range of partnerships that we have as a council. And I have to say that it's interesting that we are seen as not being responsive, because the number of times I've been to scrutiny committee with a belt of council policies, as in my cabinet colleagues, the number of times we have been questioned about policy positions, as we were earlier this evening. There are numerous ways in which opposition colleagues can engage, and it is not exclusively administration. Based on a proportionality, there are in some cases opposition members on those outside bodies. So I only sort of iterate that because while it was a great knock around performance, Judith, and you can do vitriol, no one can do vitriol like you, Judith, and I make that as a kind of a compliment. We do need to set, as they say, the record straight.
Thank you very much, Councillor Walters. The next person to catch my eye was Councillor Oliver and Councillor Jones. Please go ahead, Councillor Oliver.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Just a brief comment about some other ways of getting involved. For example, I'm on the board of Norwich Historic Churches Trust, and just one example, they'd be absolutely delighted if more councillors were to come along to fundraising events and all the good things that that organisation has to offer. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Councillor Jones.
I'd just like to give one example actually where as a cabinet we've looked at maybe who possibly is the most appropriate person to serve on an outside board. Maybe you are more qualified than me, but as a currently practicing registered nurse, I am a representative on the Health and Wellbeing Board. I wouldn't fall within my cabinet portfolio. Maybe it was felt that I was the person who had the knowledge that might be appropriate to know. So I think that was quite a sensible decision. But if you feel otherwise, I'll leave that with you.
Thank you very much. Any other councillor want to speak? No? Okay. Councillor Kendrick, would you like to respond?
First of all, I'll just say I thank my colleagues for actually, Councillor Walters, Councillor Oliver, Councillor Jones for saying what they did. So I think that really good to see a record strength. Secondly, in terms of what you're talking about jobs here, well, of course we do have substitutions. What I really do feel rather about is Councillor Roberts not being ridiculous, but I think rather unpleasant smear against the Vice Chairman of the United States Conservatives, Councillor Julie who has served as the local council school for 16 years. And actually, the two outside representatives representing the Civic Society and also the Multi People Defenders who also voted for her. So it's a question that the members of the Multi Conservatives, myself included, felt that she was the best person for the job. I've not got in any sense. I did great in Council Champion, but he honestly hasn't got the experience that Councillor. Yes. Yes. I would actually rather like to call upon Councillor Levitt to withdraw some of those statements.
Okay, that's the closing remarks, and we'll move to a vote now. All those who are in favour of this motion, please raise your hand. Okay. You can drop your hands down. All those who wish to abstain on this motion, please raise your hands. And against, anyone who is against. Okay, that's carried. Thank you very much. We move to item 7, which are the motions. So the first one, 7A, is the cost of living crisis in Norwich. An amendment to motion 7A has been received from Councillor Osborne. It's been circulated. Councillor Huntley has indicated he's willing to accept this amendment. If no member objects, the amendment will become part of the substantive motion. Councillor Huntley, if you move motion 7A, please.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. If this motion was timely when brought before Council in March, it's absolutely urgent now. ONS figures for the first quarter of this year showed the GDP was 0.8% above pre-pandemic levels as all sectors of the economy returned to growth. At the same time, as this motion outlines, overlapping pressures on household budgets are causing a crisis in people's struggle to meet rising prices, soaring fuel bills and tax hikes. Wages aren't going up, and are being eroded by inflation, currently running at around 9%. A surge in energy bills hits the poorest households disproportionately, since they spend some 3 times their total expenditure on these costs as do richer households. The ONS figures reveal the economy is installing, it's growing. The money is there. It's not going towards raising standards of living. It's not even being used to safeguard those who see their incomes outstripped by the growing demands. Instead, profits are too often soaked up by privateers already saturated with wealth. George Orwell once commented that when Tories grow intelligent, it is time to feel your watch and count your small change. Fortunately, to judge by the present cabinet, we yet have little to fear for our personal effects. But nonetheless, we should be concerned at being governed by people whose avarice is as apparent as their narrow thinking. Speaking on the future of the economy at the May's lecture in February, the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, outlined 3 priorities for rejuvenating national productivity: capital, people, ideas. Sunak told his audience these were 3 priorities to deliver higher productivity. At least he can count. We can't really be surprised to see a Tory Chancellor putting capital before people. Since 2010, the Tories have decided over £100 billion in tax giveaways to big business and used the pandemic to suspend procurement safeguards and award contracts worth vast sums of the public's money to private firms. Capitalism has had a good decade and a great pandemic. Tellingly, the last of Sunak's priorities is ideas. If growth and productivity are simply and simplistically thought of in terms of piling capital on capital, accumulating profits at any cost, then the majority are inevitably going to lose out for the sake of the enrichment of the minority. We know how the game works. It is rigged in favour of those who have the most to start off with. That's why working people are having to look to withholding their labour in response to this cost of living squeeze imposed upon them. So here are some alternative ideas. If ordinary people are to see their living standards fall as all sorts of living costs rise higher, we do something about it. The Chancellor could upgrade benefits payments so that for residents trying to make ends meet, living is affordable. Increasing local housing allowance, capping rising private rents, increasing working tax credits, abolishing the vicious bedroom tax, and improving wages and employment rights. Ideas to make material differences to the lives of Norwich residents. Wealth hoarded isn't delivering anything, isn't productive. It's like the mouldering coinage sequestrated in his castle by that archetypal bloody capitalist, Count Dracula. It's wealth that is inert. Alternatively, wealth fairly distributed is the lifeblood of a healthy society. That's an idea I hope everyone here can get behind this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I call upon Councillor Waters to second this item.
In 2011, just as the first wave of coalition benefit cuts swept in, I went down to a local church in Lakenham just to meet some of the people working there. And there were two things that stuck in my mind. The first was a conversation where the pastor of the church said, actually, the only food parcels we ever give out are those at Christmas. And we don't use all of those. A few minutes later, 2 women appeared at the church. They had walked all the way from Bothorpe because they had already been impacted by benefit cuts and they had no food. So they walked from Bothorpe in the hope that the church would have some food to be able to give them. And that's the start of the story where food banks, as an indicator of a conscious decision to drive people into poverty, is now part of the infrastructure of our city. We have a shop, church, school, hospital, there will be a food bank. And I can link that to a second point, a not well-known speech by David Cameron, but an important speech, where he said the only way we're going to compete with India and China is we have to remove the drag of the welfare state. And they've been successful in doing much of that because the system of social security is, as we know, designed to help people through the lumps and bumps of their lives. But it's also an important stabiliser at a time like this, when we have a cost of living crisis, much aggravated by those 10 years. And I think the most scandalous thing, which in some ways people in this country have let themselves be duped into believing, some people, that the benefits in work, pensioners, people with disabilities, that they are given, as it would be seen, is a handout. But the reality is, it's an insurance policy. We pay our taxes, direct and indirect, to get the social security that we need at times of duress.
And you start to wrap up this.
We would not allow an insurance company to defraud us. We should not allow the government to defraud us of the things that we have paid for. And I'm hoping that this cost of living crisis will change the mood on this, because otherwise the dire descriptions that the Councillor Huntley has given will come to pass.
Thank you very much, Councillor Waters. We're going to invite group spokespersons. Councillor Haynes, if you could, please go ahead.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. And thanks to Councillor Huntley and Councillor Waters for bringing this motion as well. I think on the whole, it's a really important and really quite timely thing to be discussing right now. So when I was writing my speech about this, I was thinking back to when I was elected for the first time in 2010, and the Tories had just taken power. So I've been a councillor for 9 years in that time. I've represented 2 different wards, and I've lost count of the amount of people who I've met who've struggled as a direct result of these government decisions. And it's not just indirect results, it's the direct result. The government has made decisions that have ruined these people's lives to a certain extent. And if you add in the pandemic, Brexit, fuel costs rising, we all know that this is only getting worse. And I saw a really interesting map online just before the Jubilee weekend, and it was a map, all those little dots, being similar ones to Jubilee street parties. So this isn't a map of Jubilee street parties, this is a map of food banks in this country, and there were so many dots you couldn't see where they began and ended, because that's how many food banks we have in this country now. This motion lists a massive amount of things that are causing the cost of living crisis, and obviously don't have time to talk about all of them tonight. The free school meals one is one I pick out particularly important, not just because my kids have fallen into the group that benefits, but because it's an example of, on a local level, how not to help struggling people as well. The county council obviously have been involved in this as well, and I think we've got to take into account what our own role can be in solving the cost of living crisis here. So firstly, when the idea of the vouchers for feeding children out of school was introduced in the pandemic, it's been precarious and uncertain the whole entire time. Families who benefit from this have not known whether it was going to be withdrawn at a moment's notice, or turned into a holiday childcare scheme that their children can't benefit from. that's discriminating against some children, and then brought back on a lower amount. And it's meant to be an unnoticeably lower amount, I think that's how they've done it. But to families, that extra £15 a year is actually a big deal. You know, if you're having to go to a food bank and read your food, you need this amount of money. And this is an example of the absolute disregard of the government that those in power at county hall have for families receiving this. It doesn't matter if we constantly mess around with these people's money. They're not that important. That's the message that these families receive from this. And then you watch what other organisations are doing. My daughter's Brownie Unit found vouchers at Easter for supermarkets for families they thought were struggling, phoned up the parents and children in the unit and said, do you need this? And that was more than the county council, which has a duty of care, more than the government, which has a duty of care, managed to do for children in Norwich. I think this motion could say much more about what this council could actually do. Obviously, I'm aware it's being seconded by the leader of the council, and Alan doesn't need to propose policy to the council in that way. It can be done through cabinet. So writing to the government is a thing that we can all endorse, I think. It's one of the few powers we actually do have on some of these big issues. It's frustrating we can't influence more of government policy. But we need to be much quicker to act on the whole, I think, with radical policies that, you know, might ruffle the odd feather, but make a real difference to people on Norwich. For example, I know colleagues have been pushing the idea of retrofitting housing for lower energy bills for tenants for some time now, and it's taken a frustratingly long time to get any sort of action happening on that. We need to make sure we're doing everything we can ourselves, as well as calling on the government. Both of these things are going to be vitally important in lowering the cost of living for the people in our communities. And going back to the non-listing motion, you know, these rising costs aren't being passed along to workers. Despite childcare costs rising, that isn't going to people working with our kids. As proved by the strike action today, the rising rail fares aren't going into better pay conditions for the people working on our railways. So our residents are being hit by all sides on this. Fixing just one of these issues, even at our council level, isn't going to do anything. Fixing even 2 or 3 of them won't. And again, the recent private rental sector white paper starts the process of fixing some of these issues around rent rises and no-fault evictions. But it doesn't go nearly far enough. I know we'll get to that later, so I won't go on about it. It's another area we can influence, though, because by making sure we stick to our own policy for affordable housing creation developments, we can increase the stock of affordable homes in Norwich. Particularly important with big developments such as Anglia Square, who claim they can't afford to build enough affordable housing to fit the actual criteria.
Well, can you begin to wrap up, please?
Well, our residents can't afford for them not to. We need to make sure our policies as well aren't feeding into the capitalist agenda, as Councillor Humbley so rightly identifies, and make sure that we're fulfilling our need to do as much as we can to fix the cost of living crisis ourselves.
Thank you very much, Councillor Haynes. Councillor Ackroyd, would you like to speak on behalf of the Lib Dems?
I'm going to be brief because I'm not sure that I can follow the powerful arguments that we've already heard. But I will say this. It is an oft-repeated story in my family that my grandfather had often known what it was to go without food as a boy. My great-grandfather having been killed in a brickyard accident. My grandparents spent their lives helping and supporting those who were equally poor and disadvantaged. And I just wonder what they would make of the inequalities still persisting in our city 100 or so years later. I note that for March Council I wrote that 4.7 million adults had experienced food insecurity in January, with 1 million saying that they or someone in their household had gone a whole day without eating because they couldn't afford or access food. By April, this number had risen to a staggering 7.3 million adults and 2.6 million children. Food banks are reporting that users are increasingly requesting products that do not need cooking, as the cost of living prices bite steeper and families cannot afford energy bills. If predictions are to be believed, the energy price cap could reach nearly £3,000 in Britain at the beginning of October. Councillor Haynes has mentioned retrofitting, and it is a fact that problems are made worse by failure to reduce energy use by insulating homes. So we have vulnerable people shivering under blankets, while expensive heating energy seeps out through the walls. People on low incomes hit hardest, as years of low wage growth and failure of the universal credit scheme, and I know what you're going to say, have left poorer families badly exposed to increases in the cost of living. I'm not going to go on with the rest that I was going to say. We've seen some suggestions by government that will help, but they don't go far enough. With inflation at its record highest level in 40 years, we need more action from government that advance the lives of not only those who put their faith in them, but more importantly, the people who didn't. They need to protect the elderly from rising costs by uprating their state pensions in line with Bank of England forecasts. Universal credit uplift must be reinstated to make sure the most vulnerable households have the support they need. Universal credit should be brought in line with inflation. Access to free school meals should be extended. Warm home discount doubled and extended to all those on pension and universal credit. Government should end the stamp tax that they introduced by freezing the tax threshold and hiking national insurance. Hardship is something many previous generations have endured. We need to do what we can to protect this one. We fully support this motion.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ackroyd. Do any other councillors wish to speak? So, Councillor Sanson, Councillor Richard, I'll call them. Councillor Mike Simon, please.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. This is a timely motion indeed, which I fully support. And I think it illustrates clearly that this government no longer performs any useful function. It must be remembered that Britain has experienced the lowest and slowest growth of the G7 countries. Yet, in a column published just yesterday, Tory ministers were calling for wage restraint. And in the same column, it was noted the Tories are calling for an uplift in directors' fees and senior management salaries as a benefit of Brexit. I'm left wondering just when Boris Johnson will reintroduce ration books. And I expect that will be for the many, but not for the few. Thank you.
Very good, Councillor Sanson. Councillor Richard Coulson.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I would just like to give some of my opinions on this motion. I've been a councillor for 18 years now, and have never in all this time have seen such deprivation in Silverwood and across the city as I'm seeing now. At the Silverwood Community Centre, my volunteers set up the food bank during COVID, delivered lots of parcels and helped many residents with no food, and needed help. 2 years on, and even though COVID hasn't gone away, even though some would like to criticise it has, and we're helping double the amount of residents that we were at the beginning of the year. People are having to choose to eat or heat. It's not just something that is being said. Our residents are having to make that choice. Just last week, I had a 60-year-old man come into the food bank for his regular parcel of food tins. He wasn't his usual self and told us that he had just £1 left on his meter. He had a daughter, but she couldn't help him either. The room subsidised this man £15, which wasn't going to last long, but just might be enough to give him heat until his next universal payment came in. Why are people having to live like this? Why are they having so much stress put upon them at a time when life is hard anyway? Over the past 2 years, Silver Road has been making free packed lunches for the children and their families, and these are people who have free school meals, but also those that miss out on free school meals and don't earn enough to be on the next bracket up. We have just heard that John Lewis will be sponsoring us £500 and Waitrose, their sister company, will match it. This means that with the other grant which we have gone in for, which we just found out that we've got, we'll be able to feed the children in civil schools in the holidays until January 2023. And with the fantastic volunteers who have stayed with us, we'll be able to make sure they get fed in the school holidays. Another way that the Silver Community Centre has been helping to get through their community is through their community fridge. With the help of the Food Hub, Bread Source, and being one of the champions for Co-op on Spoken Road, we are able to give our residents different food, fruit and veg and bread on a Saturday morning. We've also been lucky up until recently to be able to get the fresh veg and fruit from the feed on the Prince of Wales Road, which didn't go to landfill, but we collected for our families in Seoul. Excess food from allotments is also brought in, so our hub is really a very much used community hub. Even having a reused school uniform scheme at the rooms takes the pressure off of parents and have to pay vast amounts of money to clothe their child. We are having parents come in regularly now to get clothes for their children. All of the clothes we have been washed and made sure it's in good repair. We would only ever give out clean and wearable clothes. Finally, I just want to say about a scheme from the Hardship Fund and through Norfolk Community Foundation, who are our godsends. We have just won this, by the way. We've just been given £2,000, which is for 40, £50 vouchers of energy for our residents that use the food bank and are now free. Lord Mayor, the key point I wish to state clearly is this, is that why in the fifth richest country in the world are we living in this awful situation? For me, the answer is simple. Those at the top, the very richest, are getting richer, while working people in my community are suffering. Austerity was always a political choice, not an economic necessity. So please support this motion tonight. Send the Tory government a signal from Norwich that enough is enough, and let's keep working hard to support our communities in the months ahead. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Councillor Oswald.
Thank you very much, and thank you to everyone who's spoken already, particularly endorsing comments made by Councillor Ward saying that food bank shouldn't be in existence in the first place, so we shouldn't be having that. And much of many what Councillor Bruce was saying, of course, we also wish that we shouldn't have to be doing that. I'm afraid that I don't think the Tory government will be listening to what the message coming from Norwich. But I would like to pick up on some of the things that Councillor Haynes said about things that we can do locally to try and reduce the burden of the cost of living, particularly energy efficiency and retrofitting, which obviously is especially important because the cost of living prices being caused by rising fuel bills now. In section 2A of the report, of the motion, it talks about a radical Green New Deal to insulate homes, improve energy efficiency, and develop a long-term energy strategy to secure network resilience. I would hope that we can actually implement decent energy efficiency standards in the Greater Norwich local plan. Currently, the standards that the GNLP is proposing to implement are below the government's own standards, which are in themselves nowhere near sufficient. We're going to be leaving houses, we're going to be building houses for the next few years that will have to be retrofitted at a later date because they're leaky and will be cold and drafty for people living in them, and will be, of course, to lose money from heating. Similarly, on insulation and retrofitting in Norwich of existing housing stock, Councillor Haynes referred to this. What we'd really like to see, and I know I talked about this before, is hopefully underway is a retrofit task force for the city, bringing together the skills trainers, the architects, the construction industry, the renewable energy industry, further education providers, vocational education providers, and the council and housing associations to actually work out how we're going to retrofit the housing stock of the city, starting with social housing, obviously, that's within our own remit, but moving out also to private rental and owner-occupier, especially private rental, which is often in very poor condition. I think we'll come on to that a bit later on. But this is something that we can be doing, looking at really urgently and have accelerate this work retrofit task force that we've been asking for years now. Similarly, last week, Council looked at the Preston model and localising our procurement spend. Again, I know it's been talked about, but
can you begin to wrap up, please?
Okay, so look at the Preston model, make sure that the money we're spending is actually benefiting the city and the residents in the city, implementing policies to increase affordable housing, as Councillor Haynes has said, and providing training and apprenticeship programs to make sure that people are actually getting into decent jobs.
Thank you very much, Councillor Osborne. Does anyone else wish to speak? Some of the hands? No. So, Councillor Huntley, would you like to respond, please?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Thank you to all the members who have spoken here this evening. As Councillor Atwood says, knowing what it is to go without food is something we shouldn't see persisting. Councillor Roger Colton, like many others here, will know what the reality of volunteering at the food bank looks like. We can do something, but there is a big fix needed by national governments, as Councillor Haynes rightly notes. However, we do right by the residents of Norwich this evening on supporting this important motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Huntley. We'll now move to the vote. So, all those who are in favour of the motion, please raise your hand. That's unanimous. We'll now move to motion. Alice. Move to motion 7B. Welcome back, Councillor Bowline. An amendment has been received from Councillor Osborne. It's been circulated. Councillor Jones has indicated she's willing to accept the amendment. If no other member objects, the amendment will become part of the substantive motion. Good. Councillor Jones, would you like to move motion 7B?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. As one of my colleagues commented earlier, it feels like we're going through Maslow's hierarchy of needs this evening and what scary reality we are living in. So we're talking about private renters again, and it's disappointing, I suppose, that I have to keep returning to this topic, but it's the lack of action on a national level that brings us back to it. Private renters in our city have faced three main hurdles: the affordability, the security of tenure, and the quality of accommodation. And examples of one or all of these are far from uncommon in the local press, and something I'm sure all colleagues here will have heard about from residents on a regular basis. Whilst I'm aware there are elements that we're going to discuss tonight that will be included in the government white paper, presumably, I think it's crucial we still bring this motion, because in reality it's the Tory government that's been making promises to private renters for many years. And sadly, there is no real change. We've had no legislation actually introduced that's introducing protections that private renters need. So, as one of the over 1 million NHS staff who is still waiting to find out about new home rise, I'm all too well aware of the exponential rise of cost of living. With wages out of touch from the ever-rising inflation, it's impacting on all of us, with food, electricity and petrol rising month on month. Private renters, they were already left with so little in the bank at the end of the month. When I looked on Rightmove earlier, in quite a many parts of the city, rent on 2-bedroom terrace is exceeding £1,000 a month. So before we even get to the challenge of heating that often poorly insulated home, keeping the home itself is a challenge when that takes over half of the average Norwich take-home salary. But Lord Mayor, a house or a flat is more than just bricks and mortar. It should be a home, a place of safety and security, a place to relax and enjoy, somewhere you might raise a family, and importantly, a place you are part of the community, where you make connections and have roots. But private renters living with reality, they can be forced out at no fault of their own under Section 21, meaning they live month to month with that undercurrent of uncertainty. Then we move on to the equality of accommodation. As a homeowner, I'm lucky that if my boiler breaks, I can get it fixed as soon as possible, as I have no issue refusing a shower or a 12-hour shift. But when I was living in private rented, I remember waiting for the landlord to get hold of a mate of his who would fix it. You happened to be away for a weekend, would then come and take a look. Well, that felt like a very long week in the end to finally get those repairs completed. And from talking to residents, I was lucky with only a week. One neighbour of mine recently recounted how their boiler had broken down on multiple occasions over a 6-month period until the landlord finally decided to replace it. And it's over 6 months now since the bathroom light they reported, and it still hasn't been repaired. On a larger scale, we have cases like home apartments and some leases that we've also talked about earlier.
This is where this place we had an excess of cold, sewage backing up in showers, and negligent fire precautions, leaving residents so vulnerable, that our case against the landlord is upheld by the Royal Courts of Justice. And more recently, the actions we were forced to take to protect the safety of residents at heating sites, when the landlord has failed to undertake the required works to enable tenants to move back. So the way we bring this motion tonight to call on the government to finally make rid of their policies for private renters, giving the security of removing Section 21, and giving us greater powers and crucial resources to drive up standards in private rental accommodation for 22% of our residents who live in that sector. But the cost of living crisis we're facing, it has become more challenging for us all day by day as our wages are far outstripped by the price rises, and we need further action. Therefore, we call on the government to show they're serious to support real people and not just millionaires, and give us the power to introduce rent controls. As I said before, as a cabinet member and with responsibility for private sector housing, I am very committed to the use of licensing powers to drive up standards. And this power should sit solely with the local authority. I wish that they would remove the veto the Secretary of State currently has. Previously, they have stopped far too many successful schemes that can deliver real change for residents in other parts of the country. So, in summary, I hope the government will pay more for some of what we asked for the residents of Norwich, and I plead that the government finally take this seriously. But until there is meaningful legislation that actually makes it through the Commons and the Lords, I will retain a hefty scepticism or maybe realism about this government's commitment to the private rented sector. So I will keep talking about it. Colleagues, I ask you to show your support for Solidarity tonight for 22% of our residents, the thousands you represent, who live precariously in private rented accommodation and are hit, I believe, disproportionately by the cost of living rises. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Jones. Call upon Councillor Matthew Portsmouth Council to second the item.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. So, when I was recently re-elected in May, the first thing that I was asked by any media outlet was by Concrete, the UEA students' newspaper. And they asked what I would be doing to try to help tackle the absolute chaos within the private rented sector in Norwich. I explained that we would be looking at trying to bring a motion to Council to introduce rent controls, which would be the single biggest factor in trying to bring the sector under control. And shortly after that, I'd worked with Beth on bringing this motion to us. This motion has a number of elements to it. Obviously, the government white paper has come out, or will be coming out, and we learn more about that through the inevitable leaks to the press, modus operandi of the government rather than through Parliament originally. That tends to occur with this Tory government. However, we have seen that they are looking at taking some action to limit the use of Section 21. However, they're still not going to be limiting the absolute travesty of people being given incredibly little notice with regard to any reasonable reason that a landlord wishes to take back their home. Realistically, we do need the government to go further in their white paper. We have not seen a commitment from the government to tackle the outrageous number of HMOs in the country. Often HMOs contain some of the worst conditions that we see in the city, often being far below the level of acceptable space for someone who's living in a medicine to occupy. And we do need incredibly strong licensing legislation around that, and that legislation should actually delegate powers to local councils to decide what is an acceptable size of room, what are acceptable facilities and amenities within a complex. And in addition to that, we also need the local authority to be able to set the level of rent controls that they believe are necessary. In addition to wanting to support the students within my ward, I know that a number of residents have complained about the large number of HMOs. My answer to them is not simply to impose limits on those. However, we do need, if we do bring in rent controls, we would, by osmosis, be limiting the number of HMOs in the city. We'd also be ensuring that housing was much more affordable to those who were wanting to rent or even buy their own homes, as it would drag the prices down, which would be a benefit to many in my generation. And that's all, Lord Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Group spokespersons. Councillor Champion, would you like to speak on behalf of the Greens?
Yes, I would. Thank you. First of all, thank you for bringing this motion to the council. It's very timely, it's very important. It is interesting that it's been superseded by the government white paper. However, I would share your stated distrust in government carrying through all of its stated intentions and claims in that paper. As Councillor Haynes pointed out, writing to government is an action that we can take as a council. And I feel on this matter we can speak as one voice and put forward a strong motion and speak our mind. At this time of housing rising instability, we need to make sure that we are improving the lives of the tenants, and rents currently are rising at the fastest rate as they have for at least a decade, if not longer. And until reforms actually come in, tenants are going to be left in a particularly precarious situation. 15 years ago, living in school with a 6-month-old child, I was given 2 months' notice to leave a property that I was renting at that time. As a teaching assistant, I was on a very low salary, and it was particularly scary because I needed to then acquire a deposit to get a new property and to move. And that level of insecurity just isn't acceptable, and we should be supporting people on lower incomes, and a lot of the people on lower incomes are doing the most important jobs in our society, and so we really need to have their back. We also need to take as much responsibility as we can as a council, and not just be asking for central government to be taking action. We need to be taking as much action as we can. With that in mind, I think we need to think about, as Councillor Osborne has stated, about retrofitting, making landlords improve energy efficiency for the environmental standards, as privately rented homes are among the least effective in the country. The government has proposed that all new tenancies be EPC rating C by 2025. And that all existing tenancies by also rating C by 2028. I would encourage the council to ensure that we're taking enforcement action to ensure this is the case. This might not seem pertinent, but one of the issues which I repeatedly see as my time as a councillor and throughout my years renting and living is that mould and core insulation is a very significant health risk, and an issue that causes people's bills to be increasing. We've got a cost of living crisis going on at the moment, so I feel this is particularly quite a personal issue. We must make sure we use all the powers we already have that are available, reassuring to hear questions during this cabinet from Councillor Jones, comments on landlords and safety earlier, and it was also interesting to hear Councillor Harris and the explanation of the LET NCC, and hopefully these sort of actions we can be using to tackle and to address. These are some of the things we can do as a council. I would also like to point out that we have missed some opportunities of enforcement against rogue landlords, or that is to say that we've stepped in maybe a bit later than we could have on a few occasions. Research by Open Democracy has shown that the City Council collected much less in fines against rogue landlords than comparable councils, And we do have a lot of rogue councils. Rogue landlords. I would also like to, I've been talking with Acorn and who represent the rights of tenants, and to make sure that we're doing all that we can to support their work. But just like we would agree that food banks shouldn't exist in the first place, or just like we said, was pointed out earlier, that St. Martin's would be better if it hadn't the need to exist, Acorn really shouldn't need to exist either, because the council should be doing, all those points that the council
can you be interrupted, please?
that we need to ensure that we are delivering all the information available to privately renting tenants to ensure that they understand their rights and so that they can ensure that they are getting the best deal possible. Thank you.
Perfect time. Thank you. Councillor Ackroyd, would you like to speak on behalf of the tenants?
Thank you. As escalating house prices have taken home ownership out of the reach of many, the private rental sector has doubled in size over the past 20 years. Private tenants spend an average 32% of their income on their accommodation, compared with 18% for their own occupiers. One single parent said this to me: "Housing is a joke. Landlords don't like people on benefits. Apparently we don't look after properties. I take pride in where I live. Plus, housing benefit doesn't cover the rent, so half my benefits go on topping up my rent. I can only work term time, 9:30 to 2 p.m. The government has promised 3 times to fix renting by bringing in the Renters Reform Bill. Finally, after many delays, it's published its plans to end no-fault evictions in its white paper. I wonder how much this belated action is prompted by a damning report from the House of Commons Public Accounts Committee published in April, which found fast-rising rates and low standards in the private sector mean that safe, suitable housing is too often out of reach for renters. More than 1 in 8 privately rented homes in England pose a serious threat to the health and safety of their occupants. With issues such as mould that we've already heard about, and we all know people who live in those conditions and die sadly. The report found that many tenants were reluctant to complain about health and safety risks in their homes because of fear of no-fault eviction. The cross-party committee also found evidence of unlawful discrimination, with 25% of landlords unwilling to let to non-British passport holders and 52% refusing to take tenants on housing benefits. Although in general supportive of the white paper, Shelter has said the following: "While there's lots to celebrate, there are a few details we're still waiting for, like the evidence landlords will need to provide in order to evict people, and whether or not the government is going to fund these proposals. We know that local authorities have been operating on a shoestring budget for a long time, and if they're going to crack down on bad landlords, they're going to need the resources to do it." Alicia Kennedy, Director of Generation Rent, said there was much to welcome, but the government proposals still mean a renter could be evicted every 8 months due to no fault of their own. She also pointed out that she and other campaigners first secured a commitment to ending Section 21 and introducing an ombudsman in 2019. As far as she is concerned, there will be no rest until the changes get through both houses of Parliament and onto the statute book. As one of my strengths is straying from the point, I'll do so now and mention that in giving with one hand, the government is potentially taking away with the other as it raises again its commitment to extending the right to buy to housing associations. With Kerslaker's levy criticism of Boris Johnson's announcement, he points out that social homes are not the government's to sell, that the Treasury thinks the scheme for value the money, and 40% of council homes sold off under right to buy have ended up in the private rental sector. As a result, it appears that £9 billion is paid in housing benefit to private landlords. This is a policy which will undoubtedly be cheered through the Commons, but we're just out of the misery of those that cannot get a decent home that suits their needs. However, back to what's in front of us. Whilst we should remember that there are many good landlords who do respond when problems are reported by tenants, we need the government to deliver on promises, which we've heard before, as soon as possible, so that every private renter has long-term security in their home and the power to assert their rights. We fully support this motion.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ackroyd. Does any other councillor wish to speak on this motion? Councillor Schmidt.
Yes, thank you very much, Lord Mayor. And obviously I want to echo what a lot of councillors who have already spoken have said, but I also want to highlight that unfortunately we've had decades of failure with regards to the national housing policy in this country. We all know about the scandal of Right to Buy in the 1980s, and perhaps even more scandalous, the cuts of about 80% in the housing budget under Thatcher that were perpetuated. And indeed, unfortunately, I've got to say that they were perpetuated under the New Labour administration, which oversaw the loss of 484,000 homes to Right to Buy, and also a further 107,000 council homes that were demolished during this period. Indeed, it was only at the end of the New Labour project under Gordon Brown largely that remedies were sought to tackle this worsening crisis with regards to our housing situation in this country. But that respite proved ephemeral as shortly afterwards the coalition government took control. Corporations, unfortunately, have been quick to seize on this opportunity for financial gain. Last year, Lloyds Banking Group announced plans to become one of the biggest private landlords in this country with a target of buying 50,000 homes over the course of the next decade. But Lloyds is not alone. They're just the latest big name that is seeking to move into the very lucrative property market. John Lewis has, for example, already said that he wants to build 10,000 rental homes. And indeed, according to one accountancy firm, they quote, "Everyone wants to become a landlord." I wonder though if tenants of these properties will see any benefit, or if indeed the majority of those benefits will go to the shareholders. I think, unfortunately, I know the answer. This is yet again another example of where power and resources are moving away from labour and to capital. It is an indictment of the mantra that under capitalism, hard work pays. No. These days, bricks and mortar pay, and those that own it get and earn the most. But there is an alternative. We have a look across the channel, we have a look to our neighbours and friends in the Netherlands. The local municipal administration in Amsterdam has made it clear that, and I quote, "homes are meant to be lived in, not to earn money." Starting earlier this year in spring, homes across the city... One more sentence. Homes across that city that have a value of under 512,000 euros must be lived in by the buyer. This new rule should protect 60% of owner-occupied homes in the city from being snapped up and rented out by investors for what are often exceptionally high rates. I think we can all learn from the Netherlands.
That was 2 sentences.
Apologies.
Thank you. Any other councillors? No? So we'll move to a vote on this. Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I would just like to clarify a few points. Correct me if I'm wrong, but Councillor Champion, I believe you did not support the budget, which had a significant increase in funding for our private sector housing team to improve its enforcement actions. I would also like to clarify, whilst may have had a brief lull because of COVID, we've actually led the way on enforcement and on fines, not just locally but nationally. The reason our case went to Royal Courts of Justice is because actually no one else had been using those bits of law. So we were leading the way there. And it was fascinating to talk to some private sector housing team who, on training, had their own case being talked back about that to them from the legal training because because we were setting such a good example. So, but I will accept we can always do more, but it comes down quite simply to money. So I would like the government to fund us, as we always ask, to do more of this. And I think we've also got to do it in a way that ensures tenants are protected. So at the moment, tenants, because there is a lack of housing, are at risk of eviction for raising concerns. That's why I'm so keen on licensing, because it introduces a standard across the board. And also that will allow us to work on things like energy efficiency, because we can set our own standards through licensing. And then we can have a knock-on effect of addressing cost of living through that. So I think it comes down to money in so many different ways. Also that homes are not, as we said, they shouldn't be about reducing money. They're not pension pots, be it on an individual basis or on a larger scale like Lloyd's. They're homes, and that shouldn't be forgotten. I'd like to thank Councillor for her comments and reminding about what Mr. Henry said. The points around, yes, it was 2019, I was looking at that as well, and really sad that this, I'm talking about it then, and it's really sad that we're still having to talk about it now. I hope that we can actually have some real action, or I hope that I don't have to come back talking about the same thing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Jones, and I apologise for trying to muffle you, I suppose. We'll move to a vote. So we'll start off. All those who are in favour of this motion, please show. Unanimous. Thank you very much. Okay, 2 hours have passed. And the question I would ask you is, well, the alternative to take it. Brilliant. Okay, I need to put it. About 4 weeks shy or 3 weeks by now. People be asked to break. Yes. Thank you. Okay. Are we all here as are going to be here? Is anyone missing? Right.
I think her foot is very painful, so she's going to sit down somewhere for a moment. Oh, she should be back any moment now, but I suspect we need to carry on. We should carry on.
People happy for me to carry on. Okay. 2 hours have now passed. There is outstanding business. Can they be taken? Can those items or that item be taken as proposed business? Councillor Kendrick.
No, we will be opposing this motion.
Thank you very much. Right. So we now have item 7C. Fair representation. I call upon Councillor Osborne to move item 7C. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'm actually not going to speak for very long. It's been here for quite a long time, and I was going to speak about the voter ID part of this motion. Mobile, I was going to talk about the proportional representation side of it. I think we're all in agreement on voter ID. We all know that this is actually quite a cynical move by Conservative government to disenfranchise a large part of the population. Funnily enough, this is the kind of population that are unlikely to vote Conservative and maybe voted for more progressive parties. It's very discriminatory, the move from government. It will disproportionately disenfranchise people from minority ethnic backgrounds. It will disproportionately disenfranchise trans people, people with no fixed address, disabled people, and younger people. So I'm sure that we're all on the same page here, and I know that it will be a struggle to try and get government to listen to this, but there is quite a united front of civil liberties organisations, electoral reform organisations actually campaigning against this. And I know that officers have already started to look at engaging with the public to make sure that people aren't left out and are able to give their vote. So I hope to thank officers for starting work with that already, and I hope that will be successful in our hand to cast a vote now.
Thank you very much, Councillor Osborne. Councillor Bergline, would you like to second the item?
Yes, I'm taking the controversial part of the motion. Yesterday I met my friend Tina from Finland, and I didn't talk to her about this motion at all. And we talked a little bit about growing up in a different country to the one that we now live in. And she's very wise. She said that the one thing that it taught her growing up in two different countries is that there's always a choice in the system. You might not realise that while you're in it, but if you experience a different system, you can see that there's a choice. And then she went on to, like, for example, what's up with this electoral system that we have here, and where else do they have it, in Belarus or what? And she's obviously right, there is a choice, and she's also right that in 40 out of the 43 European countries there is proportional representation, and one that doesn't have proportional representation is Belarus. So I can give you many arguments. I'm going to give you some facts tonight. I've taken the 2019 local elections in Norwich. It's the easiest one to take because it was an all-out election. So what I've done is I've limited all votes cast for a party called the popular vote and divided it by the number of seats won by the party, a very common methodology that you'll find in the Commons Library used in general elections as well. So what it turns out to be is that for a seat, Labour needed 1,459 votes, Greens for one seat needed 3,245 votes, and the Lib Dems needed 4,534 votes. And you might have seen the tweet at the time, but that made us the third most unrepresentative council in England. I mean, I know we like being best, but I don't think that's exactly what we're aiming for. So in PR, seats are obviously allocated proportional to the number of votes, and no votes are wasted in a proportional representation system. And the evidence actually shows that countries with proportional representation outperform majoritarian countries like the UK in many really important ways, and I think we can actually agree that these are outcomes that we're all striving for. One is satisfaction with democracy, representation of women and minorities, climate policy, peacefulness and income equality. So I think that speaks for itself, and I know we all agree that those are outcomes we want to see in this city and in this country, and I think it's really important to understand that the electoral system is part of getting us towards these outcomes. And it has obviously been recognised by the Labour movement as well. You will know that Unison, the UK's biggest union, has just passed a motion in support of PR, and obviously your own Norwich South Labour MP, like Lewis, is one of the front faces of the campaign councils for PR. So I think it does speak for itself, and I really think it's high time that this council joins the ever-growing tide of support for proportional representation as well.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. So now spokespersons for the parties. Councillor Kendrick would like to speak on behalf of the Labour.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. Regrettably, this Green motion conflates two entirely separate issues. Firstly, voter ID, the Tories' government's attempts at voter suppression of the young, the poor and ethnic minorities, and the issue of proportional representation, which is two entirely different issues, both legitimate to discuss separately but not together. In Northern Ireland, in local government, there is proportional representation and a need for photographic identification to vote. In Scotland, there is a proportional representation in local government, but no need for photographic ID to be able to vote. We have been personally opposed to this motion. The Green motion in its preamble, which we cannot amend, has a statement that the all-out elections in 2019 demonstrated that Norwich is the third most unrepresented council in England. Yes, it was in the tweet, but yet the Green statement is simply not true. Even using the Norwich 2019 election results, which is not the latest data, the excess of vote share to, the excess of seat share to vote share for the leading party is greater than at least 7 other councils. Liberal Democrat controlled Eastleigh, Tory controlled Havant, Labour controlled Bassett Law, Leicester, Camden, Islington and Lambeth. And this is not an exhaustive list. I checked less than 20% of the election results, all being in the South and Midlands. I just stopped when I got to 7 because I got bored. And it's likely there are further examples in the North, and 80% of the council elections I didn't check. As part of the Code of Local Government Conduct, a council should not knowingly promote a misleading statement. So this alone has meant we cannot support the Green motion. Well, that statement is misleading as the message on the side of Boris Johnson's battle bus, Brexit battle bus. The second reason, however, why we cannot support the motion is it utterly inadequate in dealing with such an important issue as voter ID requirement. It's an attack on the democratic right of all to vote by this Tory government. As I answered in an earlier question, this Labour administration has or will deal with the issue dealt with the second and third recommendation of the Green motion so that those two recommendations are superfluous. So we're left with just the first recommendation. Yes, the Green Master Plan. It is to write a letter to Michael Grove not to introduce a law it spent the last year forcing through Parliament, clearly in the interest of the Tory party, against a strong opposition, not just from opposition parties, but also civic groups, including Age UK. Does the Green Party really think that a letter from the group leaders of Norwich will make Michael Gove shake his boots, go weak at the knees, and make him loosen his bowels? Is the Green group really serious? Yeah, this is their response. This cannot be the official Norwich Council response to such an outrageous attack by the Tories on the basic right of all to vote. That would be a disgrace, so we will vote against it for that reason. However, instead I can promise that when we fully know the government proposals, or we do not yet, this Green administration will, unlike this Green motion, come up with proposals which will be factually correct, properly thought out, deal specifically with the issue of voter ID, and propose actual measures that will try to mitigate this Tory attack on the basic right of all to vote. Firstly, anyone dealing, could you just kindly say, so I still have a minute and a half to go, finally, anyone dealing with statistics with integrity should use the latest data. Since 2019, Labour has lost 2 seats, but our vote share has increased, so the difference between our seat share and our vote share has declined. I then need to point out that if you examine the recent 2022 local election results in Norwich, if they had been government PR, the Greens would not win a single extra seat. The Liberal Democrats would only gain 1 seat. It would be the Tories who would be the big winners. They would win 6 seats on this city council. Of course, the Greens and Liberal Democrats have all in helping the Tories into power. We all remember 2010 when the Lib Dems helped the Tories into government, which began more than a decade of austerity and savage cuts to local government. But we also remember in 2016 how the Green Group helped the Tories back into power on Norfolk County Council. Vote Green, get blue.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Councillor Ackroyd, go ahead.
No, it's me this time. I'll start with voter ID. Yes. No, yes, this time. Fairer representation could not be more fundamental to what we do as councillors, but also to our democracy as a whole. It's important that we should highlight the issue, register our concerns, and hopefully facilitate improvements to the current situation. Voter ID. In April this year, the government made voter ID mandatory. That means everyone who wants to vote has to show a photograph of themselves in order to do so, starting from May 23 next year, our local elections. Currently, that voter ID means a passport, a driving licence, a bus pass, but not a young person's bus pass, or a pass card showing proof of age. As the motion says, this will disproportionately affect those from minority backgrounds, those including race and ethnicity, those with disabilities, the elderly and the young, and those who are on low incomes. It could mean that 2.1 million people are denied a vote, and all for what? To deal with a very small, almost negligible amount of voter fraud which takes place. The obvious and common sense solution would be to look at that small amount of fraud and deal with that, rather than disenfranchise possibly 2.1 million people. But this government lacks that common sense approach and would rather than look for ways of being more inclusive, puts further barriers for people to overcome to be participants of democracy. I understand that secondary legislation coming forward later this year will include how voter ID will work in practice, the issue of the new free voter cards, and how postal voters will be affected. The Election Commission, who undertook some research into the effects of voter ID, cautioned that a national rollout must ensure voting remains accessible to all, and that the application process for a free voter card should be easily accessible, and that the scheme should be introduced with manageable timescales and proper funding. So that's all right then, isn't it? As they say in private eye, when things are far from all right. If, as I suspect, our voice is not heard in the Minister of State's Department and voter ID gets the go-ahead for next May's elections, I hope that, as we often have to in local government, we pick up the challenge and introduce ways that people can easily obtain voter ID cards through publicity and engagement with the council and its partners. And I do believe just writing the letter is worth doing. We're going to do that with the other motions of Councillor Kendrick, so why not with this motion? Well, we might as well all go home then. To turn to fair votes, on the issue of the representation through a proportional voting system, the Liberal Democrats have PR hardwired throughout their DNA. And we are discussing the principle of it, not what it would result in, in 2019 or last year. It's the principle of it. We know it to be fair and we know it to be democratic. We've got a very unpopular government, and they were voted in with an 80+ majority gained under the first past the post system. The decisions it has and will continue to take, the divided state of the nation and the discontent that arises from those decisions, is there any wonder that people become disengaged and feel alienated from politics and from voting? How can anyone justify the first past the post position? Looking at the makeup of this council, if it were a proportional system in May, certainly Labour got 45% of the vote but have 64% of the seats. Greens got 29% of the vote and have 28% of the seats, so they're about right. Liberal Democrats got 10% and we have 8% of the seats, so we're not far out. But it's the Conservatives that are the greatest losers. Now, whether you like them or not, they do deserve a voice. They're part of our community in Norwich. On the whole, both Conservatives and Labours believe that it is better for the country to be governed under unfair rules that give their parties a majority of the seats when it has a minority of the votes. They do so because it keeps their party in power, and that is what they seek to achieve, not what is fair, democratic and best for the residents. Recently, however, some Labour MPs have started to speak out. Prime Lewis in particular, he said, "I believe in PR. What we currently have is an ugly political system, an immature system for the 19th century. Politics can be better when it is less tribal and more plural." While some Labour MPs are willing to speak out on PR, the leadership is not. One suspects Labour is not willing to share power, even if that means not winning another general election. When will Labour acknowledge fair votes and the benefits this brings to everyone?
Thank you, Councillor Lodge. I've got two people so far to speak. Councillor Mike Sands, please go ahead.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I make no apologies. I do not support the Green motion. To begin with, it sadly conflates two completely separate ideas: voter ID and registration with an alternative voting system. Secondly, under the Green proposal for merely proportional representation is essentially a ticket-based system in which voters could be lumbered with a representative for whom they would never have voted. Why have the Greens not proposed a constituency-based instant runoff or single transferable vote? This is the system I grew up with in Australia. And while we're on this subject, why in the motion is there no mention of perhaps compulsory voting? I'm loath to mention this, but I will anyway. This would have nothing to do with perhaps the rumoured alliance in county between at least one Green member and the Tories, would it? This would come as no surprise, after all. Two past Green leaders have crossed the floor to join the Tories, the most recent defection handing control of council back to the Conservatives. The statistics on proportional representation, which we've heard, reveal no change for the number of Green members. Statistics do show an increase in the Labour share voter share overall, but would open the door to 6 Tory members who came nowhere near winning a seat under the current voting system, with no distribution of preferences occurring. Who would want representation under a ticket-based system for no one they had the opportunity to vote for on a constituency-based voter system? Thank you, Lord.
Thank you very much. Councillor Waters.
Sadly, this is a very poor motion. I think the purpose of the Green Party tonight really is sitting in that second paragraph in the preamble, which is to effectively delegitimise the votes of people who voted for a Labour administration. We will, as Councillor Kendrick said, do a better and more comprehensive job in leading a critique of the voter ID issues that will be crystallised, I guess, in the next few months, and we will hope that the other parties will join us to support that. The reality is that we've had a referendum, we've had 2 general elections, we've had numerous elections at local level and nations, and there's been really hardly any voted for, any misrepresentation. I think 7 cases were resolved in court and people were found guilty. And let's think about elections in Norwich. There have been no examples of voter misrepresentation, except of course there's been one in 2018. where a Conservative Party worker from Norwich North was brought to court and fined for 3 counts of causing or permitting a false signature on nomination papers. And one feels the irony that the MP for Norwich North, as Councillor Kendrick quite rightly put it, and put the footings in on this voter suppression policy. And I think that's a tremendous shame given the history of people fighting for the right to vote in the city. To have somebody for the first time, this is a comment I've made in my column in Norwich Citizen, for the first time in over 150 years, the right to vote has been restricted rather than expanded. So we can't accept this because your facts are wrong. And that is not a good way to bring a motion to this council that seeks support for it. So we will vote against this, and we will then come back and we will deal with the substantive issue, which is the voter suppression which the government is trying to impose on this city, on its citizens. And every time somebody goes in to vote in an election in this city from next year, just remember it's because Chloe Smith doesn't trust you to vote honourably and honestly.
Thank you very much, Councillor Waters. Councillor Sue Sands.
Do you know what? The second part of this motion reminds me of school sports day, for those of you who remember school sports days. Not every child is going to win a race, and there's always going to be a child who comes over and is upset because they didn't win. So they want to change the rules. They want the first over the line. So, oh, it's not fair, let's change the rules. Now, I've got to change the radio because different councillor people speak. Councillor Bogan seems to believe that PR is a better system of voting and would improve the Green Party's chances in election. Not so. I have also, excuse me, I'm talking, not you. I have also experienced a different system like yourself and your friend. I am a veteran of PR voting, as Australia has always had a version of this, and while it worked, admittedly, in the Labour Party's favour at the recent federal election, it was not the case for many, many years. And finally, since you seem to think that the current system is so flawed and unfair, can you please tell me this? In the recent May elections this year, using the current system, which wards do you feel that the Green Party won unfairly? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Sands. Councillor Schmierer.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lord Mayor. I'll try and get through my points as quickly as possible to comply with the 3 minutes, but I suspect I might fall a bit short, but I know you'll correct me when I go perhaps a little bit too long. But I just wanted to say the first point is, I think it's perfectly reasonable to discuss voter fraud and the attempts to erode democracy through the Conservative policy and also proportional representation, because they are all part of an initiative to improve voter emancipation. Personally, I would love to go further. I would love to see online voting. I would love to see an end to this voting on a Thursday for some kind of archaic reason. I would love to see if we actually had a day off work, and if you took the time to go out and vote, you would get the day off work. All of these things are ways that we could improve voter emancipation. They could all have been discussed. I think that would be perfectly reasonable to do in a motion such as this. The second comment I would like to make is about that letters don't seem to serve a purpose. Well, we have wasted an awful lot of time in this chamber tonight and on other nights in my 7 years as a councillor here if we think that those letters mean nothing. We write those letters because it shows the groundswell of support. It shows that there are residents who do, and representatives who do want change, and change is needed. Because I hate how we have these one-party states dotted around the country, whether it be Norwich with its Labour-dominated council, or whether it be Broadland with its Conservative-dominated council. There is a fairer and a better way to do it, and this is what proportional representation can achieve. Then there is, of course, the point, well, what kind of proportional representation? Well, for me, it is the additional member system. It is a system that doesn't allow the constituency or the ward link as well as the fairer system. This is something that maybe a committee like scrutiny could examine as we go forward. The last point I would like to make is, I suppose, in response to Councillor Susan's point about the changing wards and the changing systems. Earlier, I did criticise New Labour's record on housing. I would like to end by commending your record in involved administrations where you did introduce proportional representation, whether that was in Scotland, whether that was in London, whether that was in Northern Ireland, or whether that was in Wales. If you are voting against this, I assume you think that was a mistake. I, for one, as someone who lived in Scotland and voted in Scotland, think it was the correct decision, and I commend your party for doing that about 2 decades ago.
Thank you very much. Councillor Champion.
Well, while we're on the topic of democracy, but it seems actually pointless saying anything because the Labour group have got a whip and decided how they're going to vote before we come in. So this isn't a debate, this is theatrics. And since I've been elected a year ago, I've been astonished by the theatrics. I'm being told that stating this as a letter to government is pointless makes the other motions today also pointless. And I find the tone quite appalling and quite shocking, to be honest, to be perfectly frank. We live in astonishing times, and we actually are not that different in policy and outlook. I would encourage you, dear sir, to read maybe actual policy instead of just repeating and it's mantra. You're just speaking. I don't understand this. Like, actually look at the policy, okay? Because it's just shocking. Sorry, and I know that I'm rambling there without such eloquence, but I felt especially Councillor Hendrick's initial points were largely without merit.
Thank you very much, Councillor Champion. Does anybody else wish to speak?
Thank you very much. Yes, I just want to comment on Councillor Kendrick's comment about the Greens abstaining in the leadership at the County Council in 2016. Just to explain our reasons. At that time, the Labour minority leadership was in an alliance with 13 UKIP councillors, and the Labour leader described UKIP as having policies in common with the Labour Party on the county council, and the Labour leader appointed a climate change denier from UKIP as chair of the Environment Services Committee, and the Labour leadership were in alliance with the UKIP councillors who voted against refugees coming to Norfolk. And for those reasons, the Greens abstained on the leadership vote. For that very reason, because we couldn't stomach the Labour keeping alliance with 13 UKIP councillors. So I think you need to remember your history.
Can you move towards talking about the motion, please? But have you finished speaking? Yep, okay. Is there anybody else who wishes to speak? So, nobody else wishes to speak? Councillor Osborne, would you like to respond?
Thank you. I'd just like to pick up on a few of the points that were made in the debate before moving to what I feel is the substantive point of this motion. Firstly, Councillor Kendrick talked about letters not being, might not go into the notes of the letter. You might recall that I said that earlier in this meeting, but it's worth looking back actually to how many motions we've had at this council that have just been letters to the government from the Labour group. I feel, Councillor Champion, thank you, that one. by Councillor Champion that I feel really frustrated actually sometimes in this chamber. We're just debating stuff that will get sent to government and nobody will listen. So what we actually want to see is things that will make a difference, as Councillor Shearer said. Councillor Kendrick, you said that the Labour vote went up in 2022 and yet you lost 2 seats. Yeah, so how's that fair? So you've got more votes, but you lost more seats. How's that fair? So, Councillor Sands, both Councillor Sands have said, you know, this is a system that's like a school sports day race. And first past the post, to be honest, is a bit like that. It's childish. It's one winner takes all. It doesn't actually allow for fair representation, which is what this point of this motion is about.
Okay, can we please let Councillor Osborne speak?
Councillor Kendrick and Councillor Waters both said that we had the facts wrong. Actually, if you look at the facts, what Councillor Spurgeline explained in the very first part of her speech was that the facts we used, figures we used, were based on the number of votes cast for each party representative to how many seats they got. And Norwich was the third most unrepresentative council in the country in that regard. Yes, it is. And finally, I'd like to say that, you know, we're not interested in whether Greens won seats fairly or not, whether Labour won the seats fairly or not. What we're interested in is whether voters actually get the representatives that they want, that they vote for. Councillor Sands said earlier that, well, maybe people will vote for us, get a representative that they didn't vote for. That's what we get under the current system. What we want to see is people who actually feel like they're not wasting their vote.
Yes. Okay, go ahead.
I did not say that. Under the current system, people get the person they voted for by the simple fact that the person gets the majority of the vote. Simple as. And I certainly achieved more than 50% of the total vote in my last election.
Okay, thank you. Carry on.
Simple fact, you didn't get, not you personally, but you don't have to get the majority of the vote.
Let's not play a tennis
This is the whole point of the first point past the post vote. You don't have to get the majority of the votes to win an election. You get more than any other single party. But that means that 70% of the electorate can be disenfranchised. They don't get any say. Those votes are wasted. It doesn't make any sense.
Councillor Osborne, can you...
Not proportional representation.
Thank you. Have you finished? Because you've run over, but I'll give you another sentence.
I was being interrupted, but as I say, the main thing about this is that we believe that people should be represented by the representatives that they actually vote for, and that's not what first past the post delivers. It's an outdated system.
Okay, right. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, we're going to a vote now. First past the post.
Single transfer.
Can we get one? All those who are in favour of this motion, please raise your hand. Okay, that's it. All those who wish to abstain on this motion? No. All those who wish to vote against, please show your hands. So the motion falls. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for persevering in this hot chamber. Thank you to officers again for staying out past your bedtime, and